All right, so welcome everyone to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest in the building. His name is Andrew Gazdecki. He's a longtime entrepreneur. He's the founder of Bizness Apps, a company operating in over 40 countries and employing over 100 people. His second business, Altcoin.io, was a decentralized exchange for trading digital assets, which was also acquired. He's now the founder of MicroAcquire, which we'll put the link below, but you should definitely check it out. Andrew, thank you so much for being here, man. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about a couple different things because I think we could talk for hours, but there's two or three topics that I really want to touch on. The first one is related to the company MicroAcquire, which is the company that you're running right now. And I want to talk about selling companies and why should entrepreneurs do that? When should entrepreneurs do that? What are the lessons you learned after selling business apps? So the first thing that I want to ask you is, do you think we've over-glorified getting to unicorn status? Like that's the only way that we can consider as success? And we have stopped celebrating those smaller, growing, or profitable startups that took a lot of effort and are actually life-changing companies as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two types of entrepreneurs. Like, some want to be king. They want to raise a ton of money. They want to go big. They want to IPO. And I have a ton of respect for those entrepreneurs because it's not easy. And they create some amazing businesses. But if you just look at the statistics in terms of what it takes to build a company like that, the odds are just stacked against you. Like a question I would ask you this, Marty, like, would you invest if I came to you and I was like, hey, I got this great investment, man. It's going to take 10 years of your life and you have a 1% shot of succeeding. Like, would you take that investment?
I wouldn't. Some people
So
would.
that's kind of what, entrepreneurs are signing up for when, their goal is to build a unicorn. Obviously when it works out, it's amazing. But, when I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, especially second-time founders, there's just a different thought process. And that thought process is really understanding, how can I be successful and understanding how can I maximize my odds of success? And that other path is building, a business that does $1 million a year, $2 million a year, $5 million a year, 10, 20 million a year. In VC land, that's a complete failure.
Right.
Which is insane. Like a 20 million a year business is a failure. So I think, it has been glorified. I think people are drawn to extremes. Everyone wants to hear about the next Mark Zuckerberg, the next Airbnb, like the next Zoom. But, the people that really inspire me are the ones that are just building profitable businesses, doing what they love, understanding that you don't have to build a unicorn to be successful. So there's two routes, and one's for a certain type of entrepreneur, and I think a lot of other entrepreneurs are really starting to understand that it's okay to build a profitable company that makes you happy, that serves customers that you provide a lot of value to, and by doing that you're really just optimizing your chances of success. And then, the other part I would add to that too is, if you do want to build a unicorn, you don't have to start out like saying like, hey, I'm going to build like the biggest thing possible. You can, start slowly, find product market fit, avoid investors, build that into the DNA of your company. Because without investors, every dollar that you spend it as if it's your own dollar, because It is. And then when you raise money from investors, you're going to be more diligent and your unit economics are going to be much stronger. So that's a great question. I hope I answered that question because I could talk a lot about it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think, I think we should celebrate, the funding announcements a little bit less. I'd love to see companies start celebrating, revenue milestones, things that like aren't vanity metrics, instead of just, hey, sold a third of our company.
Right.
Let's all celebrate. Even though obviously that capital is used to fuel growth. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The companies that excite me most are the ones that you don't hear in the headlines.
Yeah, I remember when I was starting out, we were like at 10K MRR, and I would compare myself to like these companies that were like with VC money, and like they were doing like 15, 20, 30K on MRR, which were really small companies for a venture back company. But I was like, why are we not there yet, right? Like, why are they like winning us? Why are we so behind? And then I started thinking, right, like, they have so much money that, and it's not their single, like every dollar they spend, it's not theirs. Like when I started with in my bedroom with just a laptop. But it's a different start, and it's hard to compare yourself with them. But there's a point when you run a bootstrap company where I think, like you touch on MicroAcquire and a few articles that I've read, where it's good, or it can be a possibility to sell and move into something else. But we offer here the advice: the more money you raise, the better. In what ways not relying on VC money was helpful to exit Bizness Apps successfully?
So when you don't raise, let me rephrase that. So the more capital that you raise, the higher bar you place for a
Right,
successful exit. So a good example would be, we just raised $20 million at a $100 million valuation. So you have to sell it above $100 million. Anything below that is going to be considered a failure to your investors. So you were getting rid of a ton of optionality in terms of selling your company for $1 million, $5 million, 10 million bucks, whatever, which is all life-changing amounts. And I always find that interesting because your life doesn't really change after $5 million. And that's a lot of money, even $2
right,
million or 1 million or like 500,000. The only thing that really changes is your house gets a little bigger, your car gets a little faster, stuff that does not make you happy. So that's why I always like to use the term, like, do you want to be king, or do you want to, be happy and, financially secure? And there might be a path where you avoid venture capital by focusing on profitability and focusing on a sustainable business where cash flow is important, profitability is important, and it's not just growth at all costs. And another thing about venture capital too is it's easy to get kind of like trapped in the cycle of how venture capital works. The first board meeting after you raise a Series A, guess what most investors talk about? It's how to raise the Series B.
right.
Literally, you just got, let's say 8, 10, $12 million. Like, you haven't even deployed like 99% of it. And then the first board meeting is, how are we going to get to the Series B?
That's
It's
crazy.
not, and again, I can't speak for every board meeting. I'm not in every one of them. But from the ones I've been in, it's a talk of, how do we get to the next group of investors? How do we convince the next group that, they need to invest to fuel the company farther? And again, that's not always the case, but I think that's another thing with, um, venture-backed companies, is just this heavy reliance on capital to continue growing their business. And I think, it's just not the best route for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are waking up to that, where you don't have to be in Silicon Valley.
Right.
You're in what, Spain right now?
Yep. Barcelona.
Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area, mostly because my wife's family is Italian and she has a big Italian mob family out here. So I kind of had to move out here, but not for the tech scene.
Right.
My point is just, you can build a company from anywhere. Like you said, you got started with your laptop, your own money, and you just got to work. And now you're running a company that I assume makes you happy, that, you have
Sometimes.
very, yeah, I mean, every business has problems. You're adding value to your customers. It's sustainable. You don't answer to people telling you, hey, you have to go up market, grow faster. You
Right.
need to focus on like enterprise accounts and stuff like that. And that may not be where, your passion lies. So yeah, long-winded answer to that question, but
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's just smarter paths to take for entrepreneurs if you just understand statistically, what are your chances of success? And then if you do go down the venture route, definitely understand what you're signing up for. You're signing up to build a very big company and grow really fast. And that's gonna take a lot out of you physically, mentally. Not saying that's a bad thing, because a lot of my favorite companies are venture backed.
right.
But a lot of my favorite companies are bootstrap backed as well, or not bootstrap backed, but
Yeah,
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 you
I
know what
feel
I
it.
mean.
Something a bit more personal that I want to ask you is, for us, running a business, it's like having a baby, right? I mean, I'm not a father, but I can imagine it's something similar. When you saw Business Apps and Alcoin, did you ever get like the feeling of separation, like you were selling out, or was it something that you just felt was natural and the right time to do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I built both companies to sell. That was my goal.
Mm,
Business Apps was incredibly profitable from pretty much the get go. Ran the business with $2 million in the bank, all the way up into the acquisition, which was actually purchased with a 1x multiple, which is interesting. You can sell the business with cash in it. But when you sell a business, it definitely, like, it's a part of you. So when I sold Business Apps, I had ran that for 8 years, and it was some of the best times of my life. I feel like I look back now and I'm like, that was such an amazing journey. And so when I sold Business Apps, um, there was a period where I definitely, like, missed the company. I missed, my team. We had, a very, very fun culture. And so we were a family. And then all of a sudden, I'm out of the business and I'm like, okay, what do I do? And that's just a natural part of the entrepreneurial journey. So I'm a big proponent of selling companies when you can. And we can talk about, when is the right time to sell a company. But as an entrepreneur, that's, essentially the day that, you were, paid for the hard work and the value that you've added to the world. And at Business Apps, there was years where I never took a salary, multiple years. Really put everything I had into that company, with the goal of it being acquired, and that being when I would have my financial outcome. Altcoin specifically was, once you have a company acquired, you kind of are able to understand what buyers are looking for. And so even from, like, the first couple months of operating Altcoin, my second company, we had already mapped out the strategic buyers that would probably be good fits for the company.
mm-hmm.
So very early on, and we basically ran a process where we would update them as if they were investors, because we felt that the best way to have the company acquired was to keep them involved, keep them updated. And that's what we did. And so, it got to a point we built something of value that fit really well strategically into another company. And that's how the acquisition happened. So it was essentially like building a puzzle piece that fit perfectly into another company. And that was the whole thesis behind the company. Um, but yeah, man, like, companies are your baby. Like, they
Yeah,
really are. But at the same time, I did raise 100,000 for Business Apps.
yeah,
So as CEO, I have a, fiduciary duty to show return on that investment. So, getting the company acquired was my goal from the start. And I feel fortunate I was able to do that, because I also talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that, you know, maybe raise a little bit of money, maybe raise a little bit too much money, and it just, the acquisition optionality is a little bit more limited than what I had, because I had raised so little capital. But I still wanted to show return on these investors that believed in me when I was, 21, took a shot on me. And that was another really rewarding part about selling Business Apps, was I was able to, return a substantial return to my investors.
right. You briefly touched on it, but it seems like, especially with Alcoin, but as well with Business Apps, you you built it with the intention of selling. So what are some of the things that founders that also want to eventually sell their company should be thinking about from day one to make sure that that's the easiest process possible? I'm asking because I started the company when I was 22, and I don't see it I don't see myself running it until I'm like 50. So
Yeah.
what are some of the things that like I should be thinking about if I want to sell a company? I know it's different with SaaS and a service-based business, but what are some of the principles behind it?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing would probably be to map out companies that you think would be good strategic partners. That's always the best place to start is, really starting those conversations early, because strategic partnerships can take a long time to, it's just like dating where, you really got to get to know the team, the company. How does this fit into the organization? And it's not going to happen overnight. So starting those conversations, or at least getting your company on the radar, is probably the first thing I would do. And then also understanding, what people look for when they buy companies. So you have financial buyers that are going to be looking at profitability, mainly revenue. This is if you're selling to, say, a private equity firm. They'll be looking at revenues typically above 10 million and above. I've seen a big flood of what I call like micro PE firms. That's what I see a lot in MicroAcquire, which looks at revenue lower than that. But strategic buyers are the ones that are going to pay the highest multiple for your company. So starting those conversations early, being able to really document every part of your business is something I'd recommend. So, whoever acquires your company can operate it without you in it. That's just a great way to be a CEO as well, is every part of the business, fire yourself from that
Right.
part, find someone smarter and just let them run with it. But I'd say the main thing is just, having conversations early with people that you think your company would fit in perfectly, like a puzzle piece, into this large organization.
I love that. I think that's also going to make a great clip, by the way. But the second topic that I want to touch on, and we've briefly touched about off camera a few days ago, was about telling stories, like storytelling, and how that can really change a business. So the first question that I want to ask you was, what makes a good story, and how do you make it resonate with potential clients and the market?
You gotta take a stance. You gotta have an opinion. You gotta pick an enemy. An example at Bizness Apps was, you know, we were a platform that helped small businesses, get onto their customers' phones. So we developed mobile apps, progressive web apps for small businesses to connect with their customers where they were, and that's on their mobile phones. But to develop a mobile app, it's like $50,000. It's 6 months of time. And then if you want to update it, it's like another 5K. And guess who can afford that?
Right,
Not
the big
small
companies.
businesses, but big businesses can. And so we worked on this narrative where, we were helping small businesses essentially compete for their livelihood against mega brands. So these large corporations, these large chains that could afford this expensive technology, this expensive marketing tool for their customers. And we were helping small businesses offer that same sort of customer experience, but at a fraction of the cost. And so an example that we would use to really incorporate storytelling is, what's your favorite coffee shop?
My favorite coffee shop's a very local one here in Barcelona.
Nice. So do they
They're,
have any sort of like mobile ordering, like you can order in advance or anything like
they
that?
don't. They're very behind Starbucks.
So there you go. Starbucks
Right.
has a multi-million-dollar app. And so, we would reference that like, we can allow you to deliver a customer experience just like Starbucks, but at a fraction of the cost. So you can compete against them. You can compete with the big guys. And so we basically had a small business versus big business narrative. And that can apply to any sort of company. I think Salesforce did a really good job with that, where they branded an enemy with, all software is installed on premise. And they were like, no, everything needs to be in the cloud. And people hated that at first. But over time, obviously that played out. really well for them. I think another good example would be Drift, where Drift is a company that does conversational marketing. And they said, you know what? People are sick of filling out these forms. They just want to talk to people right away. And they literally rebranded like a chat thing for sales teams.
Right.
It's brilliant marketing. But it was the story behind it, telling people like this is how buyers want to be treated today. They don't want to fill out a form and then be in a queue and then they get an email from someone to schedule a meeting. They want to talk, right then and there. There's a number of different stories like that, but I think the core of a good story, it starts with a problem, and then it goes through a narrative of this is the common things that people try to do to solve that problem, and then they find a way to solve that problem that's 10 times better, easier, cheaper than what's currently available. And because they solved that problem with that solution, they were able to do all this really cool stuff. You should look up the Pixar story motion. That's a really good story framework. And then also just branding an enemy and having an opinion in your market, I think is and always a great place to start in terms of storytelling. But that's your brand. That's what people are going to, feel and think and really get behind beyond just your product. And that's why brand and storytelling today, I think, is so important.
So something that you do really, really well, and that our company is based around, is like the use of personal branding to share that story. Like the figure of the CEO being more personable than the figure of the company, and using that to market that as well. So what's your rationale? What's your strategy? Or why do you think it's important then CEOs invest in their personal brand and start creating content that shares that story, shares that message?
I think the main thing is just, the way buyers have kind of shifted, where people want to buy from people that they know and they can relate to. And, they just know the person, like, their personality, like, what do they stand for? And that's a shift I think that's happened recently with, platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter really becoming popular, where you see CEOs like Aaron Levy from Box, posting funny stuff all the time. But that also permeates into the culture of the company. And it's important because when a CEO is visible to prospects with content, with their opinions, with advice or updates on the company, the prospects or the customers feel that it's a transparent and trustworthy company, and that this is someone that they can essentially trust. And business is really like built on trust. Like, you want to trust the people that you do business with. If you see a clip of a CEO doing something that, maybe like the Uber CEO is probably a good example, that's not good personal branding. You want to work with people that are genuine, that are humble, that have a good head on their shoulders, that care about their team, that's knowledgeable, and is willing to share their view, whether you agree with it or not, with the world. I can't say I have personal branding dialed down, but the CEOs I look up to the most are definitely ones that they're putting it out there. They're, whether you agree with them or not, they're sharing, what they're working on, what's not working. And, I think that's what buyers really look towards to build that trust with companies that they're potentially looking to do business with.
Andrew, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to get you out of here because I know you're busy. But like I said, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and we have to do part 2 because I have like 25 more questions to ask you that we didn't get to.
If you got 2 more, I'll do it.
No, I have like 25, but like I said, Andrew, I appreciate your time. And thank you so much. We're going to put the link to your LinkedIn, to your Twitter, to MicroAcquire below. And like I said, a pleasure always.
Sounds good. Well, hey, thanks for having me, Marty. I'm looking forward to round 2.
Absolutely, brother.